Expanding the circle of influence. It is inspiring to realize that in choosing our response to circumstance, we powerfully affect our circumstance. When we change one part of the chemical formula, we change the nature of the results. I worked with one organization for several years that was headed by a very dynamic person. He could read trends, he was creative, talented, capable, and brilliant, and everyone knew it. But he had a very dictatorial style of management. He tended to treat people like gophers, as if they didn't have any judgment. His manner of speaking to those who worked in the organization was, go for this, go for that, now do this, now do that, I will make the decisions. The net effect was that he alienated almost the entire executive team surrounding him. They would gather in the corridors and explain to each other about him. Their discussion was all very sophisticated, very articulate, as if they were trying to help the situation, but they did it endlessly, absolving themselves of responsibility in the name of the president's weaknesses. You can't imagine what happened this time, someone would say. The other day he went into my department. I had everything all laid out. But he came in and gave totally different signals. Everything I would done for months was short, just like that. I don't know how I am supposed to keep working for him. How long will I be until he retires? He's only 59, someone else would respond, do you think you can survive for 6 more years? I don't know, he's the kind of person they probably won't retire anyway. But one of the executives was proactive. He was driven by values, not feelings. He took the initiative, he anticipated, he empathized, he read the situation. He was not blind to the president's weaknesses, but instead of criticizing them, he would compensate for them. Where the president was weak in his style, he would try to buffer his own people and make such weakness irrelevant. And he would work with the president's strength, his vision, talent, creativity. This man focused on the circle of influence. He was treated like a gopher also, but he would do more than what was expected. He anticipated the president's need. He read with empathy the president's underlying concerns, so when he presented information, he also gave his analysis and his recommendations based on that analysis. As I said one day with the president in an advisory capacity, he said, Stephen, I just can't believe what this man has done. He's not only given me the information I requested, but he's provided additional information that's exactly what we needed. He even gave me his analysis of it in terms of my deepest concerns and a list of his recommendations. The recommendations are consistent with the analysis, and the analysis is consistent with the data. He's remarkable. What a relief not to have to worry about this part of the business. At the next meeting, it was go for this and go for that to all the executives but one. To this man, it was what's your opinion? His circle of influence had grown. This caused quite a stir in the organization. The reactive minds in the executive corridors began shooting their vindictive ammunition at this proactive man. It's the nature of reactive people to absolve themselves of responsibility. It's so much safer to say, I am not responsible. If I say I am responsible, I might have to say I am irresponsible. It would be very hard for me to say that I have the power to choose my response and that the response I have chosen has resulted in my involvement in a negative, collusive environment, especially if for years I have absolved myself of responsibility for results in the name of someone else's weaknesses. So these executives focus on finding more information, more ammunition, more evidence as to why they were not responsible, but this man was proactive toward them too. Little by little, his circle of influence toward them grew also. It continued to expand to the extent that eventually no one made any significant moves in the organization without that man's involvement and approval, including the president. But the president did not feel threatened, including the other star, because this man's strength complemented his strength and compensated for his weaknesses. So he had the strength of two people, a complementary team. This man's success was not dependent on his circumstances. Many others were in the same situation. It was his chosen response to those circumstances, his focus on the circle of influence that made the difference. There are some people who interpret proactive to mean pushy, aggressive, or insensitive, but that isn't the case at all. Proactive people are not pushy, they are smart, they are value driven. They read reality and they know what's needed. Look at Gandhi. While his accusers were in the legislative chambers criticizing him because he would not join in their circle of concern, rhetoric condemning the British Empire for their subjugation of the Indian people, Gandhi was out in the rice paddies, quietly, slowly, imperceptibly, expanding his circle of influence with the field laborers, a groundswell of support, of trust, of confidence followed him through the countryside, though he held no office or political position. Through compassion, courage, fasting, and moral persuasion, he eventually brought England to its knees, breaking political domination of 300 million people with the power of his greatly expanded circle of influence. The haves and the bees. One way to determine which circle our concern is in is to distinguish between the haves and the bees. The circle of concern is filled with the haves. I will be happy when I have my house paid off. I had a boss who wasn't such a dictator. If only I had a more patient husband, if I had more obedient kids, if I had my degree, if I could just have more time to myself. The circle of influence is filled with the bees. I can be more patient, be wise, be loving. It's the character focus. Anytime we think the problem is out there, that thought is the problem. We empower what's out there to control us. The change paradigm is outside in. What's out there has to change before we can change. The proactive approach is to change from the inside out, to be different, and by being different, to effect positive change. In what's out there, I can be more resourceful, I can be more diligent, I can be more creative, I can be more cooperative. One of my favorite stories is one in the Old Testament, part of the fundamental fabric of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery in Egypt by his brothers at the age of 17. Can you imagine how easy it would have been for him to languish in self-pity as a servant of Potiphar, to focus on the weaknesses of his brothers and his captors and on all he didn't have? But Joseph was proactive. He worked on B, and within a short period of time he was running Potiphar's household. He was in charge of all that Potiphar had because the trust was so high. Then the day came when Joseph was caught in a difficult situation and refused to compromise his integrity. As a result, he was unjustly imprisoned for 13 years. But again, he was proactive. He worked on the inner circle, on being instead of having. And soon he was running the prison and eventually the entire nation of Egypt. second only to the pharaoh. I know this idea is a dramatic paradigm shift for many people. It is so much easier to blame other people, conditioning, or conditions for our own stagnant situation. But we are responsible to control our lives and to powerfully influence our circumstances by working on what we are. If I have a problem in my marriage, what do I really gain by continually confessing my wife's sins? By saying I am not responsible, I make myself a powerless victim. I immobilize myself in a negative situation. I also diminish my ability to influence her. My nagging, accusing, critical attitude only makes her feel validated in her own weakness. My criticism is worse than the conduct I want to correct. My ability to positively impact the situation withers and dies. If I really want to improve my situation, I can work on the one thing over which I have control myself. I can work trying to shape up my life and work on my own weaknesses. I can focus on being a great marriage partner, a source of unconditional love and support. Hopefully, my wife will feel the power of proactive example and respond in kind. But whether she does or does not, the most positive way I can influence my situation is to work on myself, on my being. There are so many ways to work in the circle of influence, to be a better listener or to be a more love marriage partner, to be a better student, to be a more cooperative and dedicated employee. Sometimes the most proactive thing we can do is to be happy. Just to genuinely smile. Happiness, like unhappiness, is a proactive choice. There are things like the weather that our circle of influence will never include. But as proactive people, we can carry our own physical or social weather with us. We can be happy and accept those things that at a present we can't control, while we focus our efforts on the things that we can.